Stay with this until the end. Because what Garrett Lund found inside that pocket watch was about to cost Stuart Aldrich everything he thought he knew about other people. Garrett Lund walked into Aldrich and Sons estate dealers on a Tuesday morning in late October with $40 in his jacket pocket and grease still caught in the lines of his knuckles from the night before. He hadn't slept well. He rarely did anymore, not since Claire passed, not since the house got too quiet and his daughter Maisie started sleeping with the hallway light on, because she said the dark felt different now. She was 7. He didn't argue with her about the light. He wasn't looking for anything particular that morning. He'd driven past Aldrich and Sons a dozen times on his way to the shop where he worked, a small engine repair place on the edge of Barrie, Ontario. The kind of place that kept running on word of mouth and the loyalty of farmers who didn't trust anyone else with their equipment. Garrett had been the head mechanic there for 11 years. He was good at his job. He knew exactly how things worked and exactly how long they'd last. And he could tell within 30 seconds of listening to an engine whether the problem was something you could fix or something you had to accept. He pushed open the glass door of Aldrich and Sons, and a small bell announced him. The shop smelled like old wood and lemon polish, and something underneath both of those things that he couldn't quite name, the smell of objects that had outlived the people who owned them. Glass cases lined the walls. Jewelry, silverware, military pins, cameras, fountain pens. A grandfather clock stood in the corner that Garrett suspected hadn't run in years. He looked at it the way he looked at engines, with a kind of professional patience, the way a man looks at something broken and wonders whether anyone cared enough to fix it. Stuart Aldrich was behind the counter. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with silver hair swept back from his forehead in a way that suggested he'd spent some time deciding how it should look. He wore a blazer on a Tuesday morning. He had the kind of face that belonged in the background of a golf course photograph. Pleasant enough, but composed in a way that put a distance between himself and whoever he was looking at. He was on the phone when Garrett came in, and he glanced over, took in the jacket, the work boots, the clean but not quite clean hands, and went back to his conversation without a word. Garrett walked the perimeter of the shop slowly. He wasn't in a hurry. Maisie was at school. He didn't need to be at the shop until noon. He was looking at a set of old hand tools in a display case near the back, a draw knife, a spoke shave, a leather-handled bradawl, when he saw it. It was sitting in a small cardboard tray on the edge of a shelf, pushed back near the wall like something that had been set there temporarily and then forgotten. A pocket watch, gold-colored casing, or what might have been gold once, now gone dull and mottled in the way of things that had been handled a great deal and then not handled at all. The crystal was scratched, the chain was broken, 2 links separated at the clasp. The face, from what he could see, was white with Roman numerals, and there was something engraved on the back, though the tray obscured it. He asked to see it. Stuart Aldrich finished his phone call and came over. He looked at the tray, then at Garrett, and picked it up with 2 fingers and set it on the glass counter. "That one's from an estate lot," he said. "Came in with a box of miscellaneous. We haven't had time to catalog it properly." He turned it over once, perfunctorily. The movements ceased. "I had a watchmaker look at it briefly. Said it would cost more to restore than it's worth. You can have it for $35. Garrett picked it up. It was heavier than he expected. Solid, not hollow. He turned it over in his palm, feeling the weight of it, the way the metal had warmed quickly against his skin. The engraving on the back was worn but legible, a set of initials, and below them, a date, 1923. And below that, 3 words in small, careful script that he had to angle toward the light to read. "For valor rendered." He didn't say anything about the engraving. He set the watch back on the counter and asked if it ran at all. "I told you," Stuart said. "The movement ceased." "I know what ceased means," Garrett said quietly, without any edge in it. "I meant, do you know if it ran before it ceased? Was there any history with the lot?" Stewart looked at him with the patient, slightly strained expression of a man who has answered questions from people who don't understand antiques for too many years. It was a box lot from an estate sale in Collingwood. No documentation. Honestly, it's a decorative piece at best. If you're looking for something that actually tells time, I've got a very nice. I'll take it, Garrett said. He put $35 on the counter. Stewart took the money without ceremony. Garrett put the watch in his jacket pocket and walked out. The bell rang again as the door closed behind him. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for a few minutes before starting it. He took the watch out and held it again, for valor rendered, 1923. He thought about what that meant. What kind of person received a watch like this, and from whom, and whether the person who packed it into a cardboard box with estate miscellaneous had known what they were putting in there. He thought, probably, that they hadn't. He drove to the shop, put the watch in the top drawer of his workbench, and didn't think about it again until after Maisie was in bed that night. It took him 4 evenings to open the watch properly, not because it was difficult, because he wanted to do it right. He had a set of case-back tools, the same ones he used on the dashboard clocks of older vehicles, the kind of pre-war instruments that came through his shop occasionally, and that he repaired for the pleasure of it more than the money. He laid out a square of velvet on the kitchen table after Maisie fell asleep, positioned the desk lamp so the light fell evenly, and worked slowly. The case back came off cleanly. Inside, the movement was Swiss, a lever escapement which he hadn't expected. Not a cheap watch. He could see immediately why it had seized. A broken mainspring, common in old watches that had been wound too tightly by someone who didn't know what they were holding. But the plates were intact, the jewels were clean under magnification, and the dial, when he tilted it carefully, was in remarkable condition. No hairline cracks. The enamel was original. He set it down and sat back. He was not an antique watch specialist. He knew mechanisms. He understood how things moved and why they stopped. But the language of watch collectors, the provenance and the rarity and the auction records, that was not his territory. He took a photograph of the movement, the case front, and the engraving on the back, and he sent them to a man named Gus Tremaine, who ran a watch repair shop in Aurelia, and who had been collecting for 40 years. Gus called him back the following morning before Garrett had finished his coffee. "Where did you get this?" Gus asked. "Estate dealer in Barrie," Garrett said. "Why?" There was a pause on the line. "I need you to send me better photographs. The engraving on the back, can you get the light at an angle? I need to see the full cartouche." Garrett took the photographs. He sent them. Gus called back within the hour. "That hallmark," Gus said. "On the inside of the case back, the small one in the lower right corner. I need you to read it to me." Garrett had the watch on the velvet under the lamp. He read out what he saw. Gus was quiet for a moment. "Garrett, that's a presentation watch, I think. And I want to be careful here, because I need to verify. But I think that may be a Longines military presentation piece, commissioned for a Canadian officer in the First World War. There were a small number of them made. Private commissions. They don't come up for sale." Garrett looked at the watch on the velvet. "What do you mean, don't come up for sale? I mean," Gus said carefully, "that the last one I'm aware of sold at auction in Toronto 8 years ago, at Heffel, for $600,000. Garrett set down his coffee. "That was a lesser example," Gus added. "In worse condition, with no documentation." He did not call Stewart Aldrich right away. He wasn't sure why exactly, except that he wanted to know more before he did anything. He spent 2 weeks researching. He drove to Aurelia on a Saturday and sat with Gus for 3 hours going through reference books and auction records and the small, densely printed catalogs of Canadian military history that Gus kept in binders on his shelves. He wrote to a historian at the University of Guelph who specialized in Canadian military decorations and who responded, to Garrett's surprise, within a day. The historian's name was Dr. Miriam Achebe. She was precise and direct in her emails in a way he found immediately trustworthy. She asked him to send photographs, and then she asked for more photographs. And then she told him what she believed she was looking at. The watch, she wrote, bore the characteristics of a small series of Longines movements, privately commissioned in 1922 and 1923, for presentation to Canadian officers who had distinguished themselves during the First World War, and for whom official recognition had been delayed due to administrative circumstance. The presentations were private, funded by a veterans association in Ontario, and there were believed to be no more than 12 in existence. Of those 12, the location of only 3 was currently documented. This would be a 4th. She asked if he would be willing to provide a formal statement of provenance, where he had acquired it, the price paid, any documentation from the estate sale. She said she had a colleague at a major auction house who would want to see it. Garrett sat with that email for a long time at the kitchen table. Maisie asleep down the hall, the watch on the velvet square in front of him. He thought about Claire. He thought about how she used to say that he noticed things other people walked past. She meant it as a compliment, though sometimes he wasn't sure she was entirely right about it. But she had said it more than once, and he remembered the specific way her face looked when she said it, the particular quality of being seen that he had not expected to find in another person, and did not expect to find again. He wrote back to Dr. Achibi and said yes. The auction house was Heffel Fine Art, and they moved quickly once Dr. Achi made the introduction. A specialist came to Barrie to examine the watch in person. A woman named Sandra Fong, meticulous, quiet, who spent 2 hours with the piece under her own loops and then sat at Garrett's kitchen table and told him what she was looking at in the even, measured tone of someone who has learned to be careful about exciting people prematurely. The movement was consistent with the documented series. The hallmarks matched. The engraving style was period accurate. The enamel dial was exceptional. The case showed the kind of wear consistent with genuine use rather than artificial aging. The broken mainspring, she said almost to herself, was actually a point in their favor. It meant the watch had been used, wound regularly, lived with, and then stopped being used at some point and stored. That was consistent with the known history of these pieces. She looked up from the watch and met his eyes. "We'd like to offer it in our November sale," she said. "The specialist's estimate, and I want to be clear this is an estimate, is $1.2 to $1.8 million. Garrett did not say anything for a moment. "Do you need some time?" Sandra asked. "No," he said. "I'm just letting it settle." He thought about calling Stuart Aldrich before the auction. He spent several evenings considering it. There was no legal obligation. The sale had been a fair one, a price offered and accepted, and Garrett had paid every dollar asked. He hadn't misrepresented himself or concealed anything. He'd walked in off the street, looked at a tray of miscellaneous items, and bought something that Stuart's own watchmaker had dismissed as not worth repairing. But he thought about it. What he kept returning to was the way Stuart had looked at him when he walked in. Not with hostility, exactly. Hostility would have been something he could have named and set aside. It was something more corrosive than hostility. It was the particular indifference of a person who had already decided, in the 3 seconds of taking in a jacket and a pair of work boots, that the person wearing them was not worth full attention. The phone call that didn't pause. The explanation of what seized meant, offered to a man who had rebuilt gearboxes and restored vintage carburetor assemblies and could hear a valve train problem from 15 feet away. Garrett didn't call. He did, however, call Maisie's school the morning after Sandra Fong's visit. He spoke to the secretary about the hot lunch program and the upcoming class trip to the science center and whether the after-school care spots were still available on Thursdays. Small things. The kind of things that had felt precarious for the past 2 years, and that suddenly felt slightly less so. He also looked, for the first time in a long while, at the envelope of papers Claire had left. The respite she'd opened for Maisie before she got sick, the contribution small and irregular because there had never been enough month at the end of the money. He looked at the balance and thought about what it would look like with something added to it. The auction was on a Thursday in late November. Garrett drove to Toronto the night before and stayed in a hotel near the venue. The cheapest room available, which was still more than he usually spent on a single night. He brought Maisie. She sat on the hotel bed in her pajamas eating crackers from the vending machine and watching a nature documentary about wolverines with the absolute focus she gave to things that interested her, which was complete and undistractable. "Dad," she said, without looking away from the screen, "are wolverines related to wolves?" "No," he said. "They're related to weasels." She considered this. "That's surprising." "It is," he agreed. He sat in the chair by the window and watched the city lights and thought about a man named. He'd looked it up, the regimental records that Dr. Achibi had helped him locate. Sergeant Harold Brent Calloway, 48th Highlanders of Canada, who had received this watch in the autumn of 1923 from a group of men who wanted him to know that they had not forgotten. Harold Brent Calloway, who had lived to come home, and who had presumably carried this watch for years, wound it carefully and at some point stopped, who had children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren, who had eventually packed his things into a cardboard box and brought them to a dealer in Collingwood without knowing what was in them. He thought about what it meant to carry something without knowing its weight. The watch sold for $1.9 million. Sandra Fong called him within minutes of the hammer coming down. Her voice was composed in the way of professionals who have learned that composure is the most useful thing they can offer at moments like this, but he could hear something underneath it. The genuine, restrained pleasure of a person who cares about what they do. Garrett thanked her and hung up and sat in the hotel lobby for a while. Maisie was upstairs with the room key and instructions not to open the door for anyone. He sat in an armchair near the lobby window and watched the street and felt something he didn't have a precise name for. Not joy exactly, not triumph. Something quieter and more solid than either of those. The feeling of a thing having come out the way it should have, which is different from the feeling of winning. The story reached Barrie before he did. He wasn't sure exactly how. Sandra Fong had mentioned a press release, something standard for a sale of that significance, and his name was in it because provenance required transparency. By the time he got home on the Friday, 2 people had texted him, his neighbor had left a note on his door, and a local news website had run a short item with the headline, "Barrie Mechanics $35 flea market buy sells for nearly $2 at Heffel auction." He assumed Stuart Aldrich read it. He didn't know this for certain. He hadn't spoken to the man since October, but 3 days later Stuart Aldrich called. Garrett let it ring the first time. He was making dinner. Maisie's requested pasta with butter and parmesan and exactly no vegetables, which he supplemented with carrot sticks on the side that she ate without comment because she understood the arrangement. He called back after she was in bed. Stuart Aldrich's voice had a different quality than it had in the shop. The composure was still there, but there was something working underneath it now. Something that a person had to hold down carefully to keep it from showing. He said that he'd seen the article. He said that he was calling to express his congratulations. He said, and this was the part Garrett had been waiting for, the part that arrived eventually in every conversation of this type, that he wondered whether, given the circumstances, Garrett might consider a gesture of good faith. A percentage, a consultant's fee, perhaps. Given that Aldrich and Sons had been the point of discovery, Garrett listened to all of this. Then he said, "You sold me the watch, Stuart. You had a watchmaker look at it and you were told it wasn't worth repairing, and you sold it to me for $35. That was a fair transaction." "Of course," Stuart said quickly. "I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm simply, you set it in a cardboard tray in the back of your shop," Garrett said. "I asked about the history of the lot, and you told me there wasn't any documentation. That was the information you had, and you shared it, and I bought it on that basis." "I understand that," Stuart said. I know what you're asking," Garrett said. He kept his voice even. Not cold, not warm, even. The answer is no. He wasn't angry. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself, because he'd spent some time examining what he felt, and anger wasn't the primary thing. What he felt was something closer to a deep, tired clarity. The clarity of understanding that the man on the other end of this call had looked at him in that shop and made a comprehensive judgment in under 5 seconds, and had been wrong, and now understood that he had been wrong, and would carry that understanding in a particular way going forward. That seemed sufficient. He put $120,000 into Maisie's reassessment. He set aside a portion in a savings account that he thought of, privately, as the house fund, not because he planned to move immediately, but because owning a home outright would change the specific texture of his worry, and he'd been carrying that worry for long enough that he could feel exactly where it sat in his chest. He paid off the truck. He bought Maisie a telescope. Not the expensive professional kind. A good beginner one, mounted on a proper tripod with an eyepiece that could resolve Saturn's rings on a clear night. She set it up in the backyard on the first Saturday after it arrived and stood at the eyepiece for 45 minutes without moving, adjusting the focus in tiny increments with a patience that reminded him, with the usual mix of ache and gratitude, of Claire. "I can see the rings," she said. "I know," he said. "They're actually rings, like actual rings around it. They are." She pulled back from the eyepiece and looked at him. She had Claire's eyes, the particular shade of them, the way they caught light. "Dad," she said, "how did we get a telescope?" He considered the question. He thought about the pocket watch, about Harold Brent Calloway and a group of men in 1923 who wanted someone to know they hadn't forgotten, about a cardboard box and a shelf in the back of a shop and a man who looked at him and saw only the jacket and the boots. "I paid attention to something," he said, "that someone else didn't." Maisie looked at him for a moment, processing this, then turned back to the eyepiece. "Okay," she said. The word carried, in the way children's words sometimes do, exactly the right amount of meaning, not dismissal, but completion. A door closing gently, from the inside. He stood in the backyard in the November cold and watched his daughter look at Saturn and understood that some things, when they are over, do not require a ceremony. They just end, and the next part of your life begins, and if you are lucky you are paying attention when it does.